right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another fantastic episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm, as always, Nell Harrington. I am I am recording this from Seattle, though I was in Australia for DevOps talks last week. Had a fantastic time, both with the great country of Australia and the great DevOps community down there. So if anyone is listening from Australia or New Zealand, thank you for welcoming me and hope to see you again soon. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Scott Nixon. Hello, Scott.
Hello. Hey, I'm Scott Nixon. I run Cloud Mechanics, which is a DevOps consultancy. I've just been riding my mountain bike a lot this summer and not doing too much traveling. But very excited to talk about DevOps and Agile today.
One of the things that I have as a goal for devchat.tv is to cover technologies that are up and coming, things that we're probably going to have to deal with on a more regular basis in the future. Some of these include AI, VR, and one of them is blockchain. So I reached out to one of the experts that I knew, Gregory McCubbin, and we pulled together a few other people, and we've started a podcast called Adventures in Blockchain. So if you're looking at blockchain as something that you may want to work in, something that you're curious about learning more about, or something that you just want to keep current on until you have the opportunity to make a career jump and go over and work in blockchain and crypto, then definitely check out Adventures in Blockchain. You can find it at adventuresinblockchain.io.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into it. And let's start off with, I think, a little bit of a review of Agile. So Agile came out of the Scrum movement. What I remember is there was the Scrum approach to software, and then the people who led that all got together. I think was it in Bend, Oregon? It was somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And they came up with the Agile Manifesto and the Agile principles together.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it was, where that happened. I've seen a video talk of one of the guys that was there whenever it happened. So that's all. I don't even remember where that was. So.
Yeah. Oh, it came out of the Extreme Programming Project. And in the year 2000, the leaders of that project met in Oregon. I don't have written down what city in Oregon it was, which probably doesn't matter to a lot of people besides the two of us, because we're in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
But they met in Oregon and talked. And then in 2001, they met again in Utah. And that's where they wrote the Agile Manifesto, along with the Agile principles. And let me pull up the Agile Manifesto here. It's nice and short, so we can read it. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interaction over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there's value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And what I think this really kind of illustrates is I was on the phone with a Marine major recently, and he was asking me about Agile development. He said, what do you think of when you think of Agile and Scrum? And I said, I think that those words tend to be overused. What the manifesto and such, what it really highlights is it's not nearly as dogmatic, I think, as some people believe it is. It is a suggested way, and it's a set of values for writing software, but it's not necessarily you must do this. If you're doing it any other way, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reviewing, I've done some writing on this that I've not published on the internet, but it's stuff that I wrote. I've written some stuff down about this, so I figured I'd share it. I was saying that like Agile is kind of I think it's more of like a philosophical system for, software folks. And because it's kind of like this open sourcey philosophy, there's more like room for interpretation. And when you compare it to something like Six Sigma or ITIL or these things that are very like structured, and they've literally set down like these core processes and things that are like the foundations of that thing. And I think, it's Agile, you will see it all, that word used all over the place, but you don't actually know what Agile looks like within, say, each different organization that's kind of talking about it. And I think that's one of the things that makes it, a little challenging at times. But I think if you just focus on the principles, then it kind of can get everybody onto the same page.
And I like to joke, I did some Agile focused training once, and I called it agility training. Like what pets do to make them move faster, which I guess it's kind of what we software engineers or whoever goes through it, we're trying to move faster in a safe way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's also like, I've wanted to try to find some research around this, but like one of the things is that it came out of me looking at like how A/B testing often works, where, you run some test and maybe you need somewhere like 30 or 60 days to get through this test. And the whole point of this test is to learn, right? And it's very obvious with A/B testing because you're literally looking for like a winner. And I think with software and changes, any kind of changes you make to your product and your business, it's a little less obvious unless you're like literally measuring everything and spending all this time analyzing things. And I guess I'm trying to bring it back to this point that realistically, like in A/B testing, they get that they need to move fast and do lots of tests and iterate quickly. And I think that if it's not as always obvious to business owners that like the business needs to be making lots of tests and learning really quickly, because that's the only way that you can kind of stay competitive. If some competitor of yours brings out the next greatest feature, for the future of that type of product, and it takes you 2 years to get your version out, it is going to hurt you, and I have real world examples, but I've been talking for a long time. So I'm going to let Nell talk.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's very true. I mean, a lot of companies, I think today even are still discovering that the practices that worked 40, 50 years ago, where they made one thing, they did it really, really well, and just made it the same way for however long, it doesn't work anymore. And that's been the case. I mean, that was the case when the Agile Manifesto was written. That's the case when extreme programming principles were come up with. I mean, that's been the case for a while, but it's something, it still feels like a brave new world, even decades after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I don't typically find people, like I said, because this is very philosophical. If you're not like invested in the philosophy, I think in a lot of ways, you don't talk about it or think about it, or like I will at times use some of these principles whenever I'm trying to defend like a position, or like, when I'm in a situation where we're like trying to like slow down or take too much time for something, like I try to say, well, let's try to, what is the smallest amount of something that we can do to learn, Right.
It's a lot of experimentation, and small focused experiments are how you figure out what works and what doesn't in a timely fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking we'd also maybe go quickly through the 12 principles behind the Agile Manifesto.
Definitely.
One is our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Continuous delivery, that phrase kind of jumps out at me coming from a DevOps background. 2, we welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. I think that's what we were just talking about.
Yeah. Valuing learning and continuous improvement over maintaining what we currently have. Yeah.
Yep. 3, deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to the shorter time scale. I think the key words there are working software.
Yeah.
And that sounds harsher than I mean it. But I've been on projects where the code was beautiful. It was very elegant. It was a good idea, but it just didn't work at the level the business needed to. And unfortunately, what you deliver, it does have to work. It doesn't really matter how much thought and how much work into it if it doesn't work at that fundamental level.
Yeah, definitely.
4, business people and developers must work together daily through the project. This also sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah, the comment I will make about this is that one of the biggest challenges I've experienced working with business people is oftentimes they imagine, I don't know, a workflow or a set of features that either are super difficult, expensive, or time inefficient to kind of create. And I actually have an example related to when I ran a business with my wife, and it was, if we wanted to integrate into Facebook, using Facebook groups to manage, say, a community, and we want to add and remove people automatically through an API. And what we found is that Facebook just doesn't want you to automate that. They want, there's just very limited ability to kind of automatically add and remove, even if you have the customer, like the Facebook's customer ID and maybe their email. It's just not, they don't want that kind of automation set up with the Facebook groups. And so it's, even though the business folks wanted that, it just there was no way to automate it. And so you either figure out a manual process for it, or you do something else.
Cool. Number 5, build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Trust is a big factor in Agile, I've noticed.
Yeah. And it probably starts with having somebody who's, having people that are leading these, these teams that are trusted by, kind of management, that they know that these people, if they're involved in this team, they're going to deliver.
Right. And the engineers need to trust that their manager, if someone comes with a ridiculous request, that they will say no, or that they will at least push back on it in order to keep the project going. So trust has to be there for this to work. 6, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Now, this is one that I think has evolved a little bit now that we have such a highly remote working force culture. I mean, Zoom calls and such, we still do those face-to-face. But I think our tools have evolved since this was written to, we have things like Slack where it's much easier to hold conversations. We have things like GitHub where we can hold asynchronous conversations. So the conversations still need to happen. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I can imagine in certain organizations like Google and folks that don't really allow remote work, that if they are big into these Agile principles, that they may be like, remote work violates this principle or something like that. And I think I actually was having a conversation earlier today with somebody about remote work and productivity, and my general feeling is that to do remote work, you have to be more organized than if you're going to be in an office. And because yes, you can ping people on Slack and stuff like that, but I think that in general, you have to improve your personal development productivity skills to do remote work well. So
something I found from organizations that have a mix of remote and in-office workers is when one employee is remote, the entire company needs to change. Just one means you need to change how you communicate. And as you get more remote workers, you need to do the same thing.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So there's more to it than working from home in your pajamas.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I put out a survey asking people what topics they wanted us to cover on devchat.tv. And I got 2 overwhelming responses. One was from the JavaScript community. They wanted a React show. And the other one was from the Ruby community, and they wanted an Elixir show. So we started both. The React show, though, is React Roundup. And every week, we bring in people from the React community, and we have conversations with them about React, about the community, about open source, about what goes into React, how to build React apps, and what's going on and changing in the React community. So if you're looking to keep current on the current React ecosystem and what's going on in React, you definitely need to be checking out React Roundup. You can find it at reactroundup.com.
Number 7, working software is the primary measure of progress. I think we covered that earlier.
Yeah. Just because you have a bunch of committed code that's not in production, doesn't mean you haven't delivered value to the customer.
8, agile processes produce sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. So I'm hearing crunch time is a no with this. Sustainable
is key. And, it's funny because I don't know that until you've worked in an environment where you're pushed and you're burnt out and stuff like that, I don't know. I think unless there's a conversation around sustainability and stuff like that, I think it can create these environments where people would burn out and not, kind of. I don't always love the phrase work-life balance, but I mean it's definitely an important thing, and it looks different for everyone.
Something I was very surprised by when I gave my talk at DevOps Talks, it was about open source governance at massive scale. And I think that's a whole topic for another podcast episode. But at the end, I mean, one of my duties of open source governance is avoiding burnout yourself and avoiding pushing others into burnout. And so I told my personal story with that, which involves burnout manifesting physically in horrific ways. We'll leave it at that. And so many people came up to me after the talk, including these really, I don't like this phrase, but these really kind of macho guys telling me how much they appreciated that I shared that because they had experienced the exact same thing. So it's something that's been a problem for a while, and we're definitely coming to a reckoning on it, I believe.
And in my personal experience, a lot of times when you're working on a team and the team is kind of burnt from just overwork, too much time, I think in my experience, a lot of times it's about like organization and being like clear project planning has been neglected. And I've seen a lot of things around this. Is it, like you should see these things coming. So.
Let's see here. Number 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. I'm using that as a vocal warm-up next time I give a talk, but it is very, very true.
Yeah. And so that means, doing the full suite of tests and code reviews and making sure, you can still deploy software quickly and this, the same day, deploy it the same day it's written. You have to still make sure you have to have those good processes that are making sure that code that goes out doesn't break stuff. And if it does break, it rolls back automatically.
Yeah, move fast and break things is not an agile principle. I think or any principle you really should live by. All right, number 10, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential.
Yeah. The best code is no code, right?
Right. I think it highlights the need for focus in what you're building. I think I was reading an essay by Joel Spolsky, I think, or someone like that, and they talked about a program from the 90s called Microsoft Bob. Yeah. And its name didn't really tell you what it was. There was a bald guy on the cover, but it kind of did everything and nothing at the same time because it didn't have a focus on what it was supposed to do. Yeah. No one knew how to use it. And if people don't use your software, I'm not going to say it doesn't count at all, but it counts much less than if people do use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Number 11, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this one is the one that's hardest for me it's like, what is your experience with self-organizing teams?
I think of open source, honestly, when I hear self-organizing teams. In that it's mainly people who are doing it on their own time. There are a lot of people, myself included, who do open source and are paid well for it now. But for people who do it on their own time, it is kind of a self-organizing team in that it's people who have interest in it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's kind of funny because it's like, I've just never been in an organization where I just seen people like somebody starts some new project and then all of a sudden people from other teams are like asking to go to that team to do this development. I've just never been in an organization where that's happened. So I'd like to see that. It'd be neat. So
yeah, you never want your organization to be one where there's one team that does like all the cool projects and then another team is stuck with the maintenance of everything that already exists. No one wants to be a code janitor.
Well, it's funny because like that's what Microsoft has done for a long time. I don't know if they're still doing it, where they would literally do all the active development in one place, and then whenever it was gold shipped, then it basically got all transitioned to some other team, which is a funny way to do things. But yeah.
Yeah, we tried feature teams at Chef a few years ago. Where we would assemble a team just for the length, anywhere from 6 weeks to a few months of making a new feature, and then we would disassembled. It didn't work, mainly because once you launch the feature or launch the new product, it's not done. There's going to need to be maintenance on it, and particularly right after you launch it, that's when you're going to be getting the most bug reports as people are trying it out and trying it within their workflows.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, number 12, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So I think of retrospectives when I see this.
definitely. Yeah. Documenting. I mean, I oftentimes like to think of things like you start with a hypothesis, based on customer feedback. And then at the end, like after it's been deployed and people have used it, obviously at some level, this is talking about maybe just right after you deployed it. But, for me, I think it's also important to look at something in 30, 60, 90 days to see where you are and see how much changed. I mean, I think it's just a very fun learning exercise to do, Yeah, I definitely have shipped things and was like, wow, that just did not turn out the way I expected it to.
Something I've found through very hard experience is when we have a retrospective and something did not go as well as we expected it to, saying, oh, well, it'll be better next time because we have the knowledge now on how to avoid it, or because these certain circumstances will be different next time. You do need to address it head on. Mm-hmm. I've found. I remember when one of my offices had to shut down for the day because the fire alarm went off in the building. I mean, that's something obviously you don't have much control over, but if it's something organizational or teamwork wise or planning wise, unless you address it head on as a result of those retrospectives, it is still going to be a problem in the next project.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've definitely seen that I think in general needs to be more emphasized is having tech folks having more conversations with customers. Mm-hmm. And actually you can see things that people have written or things that maybe product managers have interviewed folks and then you review that. But, I think it really changes. It gives you a little more empathy when you actually talk to customers who are using the things that you're doing. And, if you actually sit there and watch people, what they call shoulder surf. So.
Yeah. I tell people sometimes about the time I was checking into an airline. I'm not going to say which one it was on the air, but I was doing the electronic check-in and they were asking me a bunch of questions. I hit yes, 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 yes. And then it asked, are you carrying any dangerous items? Of course I hit yes, because I had just done that. And so it wouldn't give me my boarding pass. It spit out this receipt telling me, please go see an agent at the ticket counter. So I went up to the agent and said, I'm an idiot. Yeah. And she said, no, you're the third one in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So they did fix it eventually, but I'm wondering if they had to watch people using it and see, we don't think carefully about every single question we're answering, especially when we're tired and going through an airline check-in.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I think that's one of those patterns where they're trying to see if you're paying attention.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't know. I think all airlines do that. And I think they use this dark pattern of yes, yes, yes. And then you have to say no as something that, I don't know. I feel like everybody does it.
Right.
So.
Awesome. Well, those are the basics of Agile and how it connects to DevOps. I did a talk a few years ago on the history of DevOps, and where the movement as we know it really started was in 2007. The father of DevOps, as he's known in some circles, Patrick Dubois, was working in IT, and he had to straddle the connection between Dev and Ops. And in 2008, he presented a project called Agile Operation and Infrastructure. How infra-agile are you? So it was taking Agile principles of software development and applying them to the infrastructure that runs the software. And he laid out 3 layers of Agile infrastructure. And the first was technical, which is the hardware and software that is used in the environment. Mm-hmm. Then there's the project layer, which is the process that introduces changes into the environment. And then there's the operations layer, which is the process of keeping the environment working. So there's these 3 layers. And what I always like to highlight when I present this is the technology part is only one factor of it. It's really the easiest part. The processes and maintaining these processes and the cultural elements are much harder.
Yeah. Like what happens whenever, there's some major system error? Like, does it recover automatically? Do people get alerted? And it's like, you have to, and a lot of times with alerting, you squash, you like don't respond or trigger alerts unless it happens multiple times or something. Cause maybe, you just get these fluke things every once in a while. There's just so much complexity to how you filter and bubble up that information. So.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and over the last few years, I've gotten to know a lot of great people within the Microsoft community. and specifically in the .NET area. One of our guests from JavaScript Jabber, Sean Clabo, actually reached out to me and said he wanted to start a show on .NET. And there are a ton of people out there that I feel like sometimes get neglected in the .NET space. So if you're one of those folks, you've been listening to maybe one or two of the other .NET focused or Microsoft focused podcasts for a while and thought, well, where's the devchat.tv style podcast for me in .NET? You can find it. It's at adventuresin.net. .NET is spelled out, D-O-T-N-E-T. adventuresin.net.com. Go check it out today.
So we were talking about how, DevOps and Agile, it's not necessarily about the tools themselves, it's about the way you use those tools. And it really, both of them are really at that tricky intersection of humanity and technology. We can only build technology, effective technology, together if we relate to each other as humans and understand what the problem we're trying to solve. There was a article talking about Craig McCluskey, or maybe he wrote it, in Kubernetes, and in it he was discussing how the problem in Kubernetes is people have become too focused on the technology for technology's sake, and they've lost sight of the business problems that technology is supposed to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Right. So yeah, it's very related to how we treat each other when we're using this technology. And it also highlights, technology is going to be a part of humanity from now on, I believe. And, even if we have a giant power outage or something, people are going to have generators. We've experienced the technological world, and there's always going to be a desire to keep at least the good elements of it, how we connect with each other. And the whole point of things like infrastructure technology, the technologies DevOps tends to deal with, is how we connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the things I often want to reach for when I'm in the process of trying to kind of organize around like new feature, or like whenever I'm trying to do new development or, work with a team, is that I always want, like, my instinct is to want to add a lot of like process and want to like really kind of like plan out like what all these features are and stuff like that. But ultimately I know that in my experience, it's better to start off with just like the smallest thing that I'm trying to solve, and then just to work through that, because it's so easy. Anybody who's made like massive to-do lists know that it's really easy to give yourself like 100 to-do lists, but it's really hard to do all that work because maybe every to-do is 1 to 5 hours worth of work. And so the same thing happens with software development, is that you can literally just imagine, infinite possibilities and things that you can do. And so, a lot of that is just editing.
Where I've seen that especially is when I've gone into controlled environments like banks, or I was on site at a national security contractor a few years ago, and they have this very visceral reaction to Agile. And it's not that they're stuck in their ways or anything. It's that the environment they operate in is so controlled and the consequences are so huge if something goes wrong. They can't necessarily afford to be moving as fast, or they have to move fast, but within their constraints. Like I remember at the time I was on site with the contractor, Apache 5 was approved for use in their environment. Apache 6 was not. And there was nothing we could do about that because it had to go through a formal approving process. What we could do was work within those constraints and, okay, we have to use Apache 5 with this. What can we build with it that will fit this business problem? And how fast can we build it within these restraints?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I often like constraints like that. I mean, it's sometimes whenever you go into a blue ocean problem of like, oh, I need to solve this problem. And you start looking around there and there's 20 different pieces of software you could use to solve this problem. I mean, it can get overwhelming, and you can literally spend days and days just trying to figure out what to use. I mean, imagine if you tried to do a quick demo of every monitoring tool that exists on the market. Or
even every Kubernetes tool.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's probably at least a half dozen service layer technologies that you could use within Kubernetes, and here, this is all like brand new stuff, and there's already 6 options,
So here's a question for you. Do you think it's possible for a company to operate agile, operate in an agile or DevOps fashion and still have kind of prescriptive solutions for certain situations? to go more in detail, let me figure out what I was talking about. I mean, the idea, I think we when we think of Agile, we think of building something from scratch because we're building, just enough to get value, get feedback on, then we build just enough more, then we build just enough more. How do you think that comes into a non-greenfield project, like a brownfield project or a lot of legacy code? Is it possible to operate in an Agile fashion in that kind of environment?
I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I think the difference is that you have to make sure that, or realistically, the people kind of at the management level and even the technical level need to understand the value of how like shipping things quickly and learning really has a lot of value, and I really think that, I mean, like DevOps really owes a lot of its kind of philosophy and the kind of the scientific backing to kind of lean manufacturing. And so if we constantly kind of go back and forth between those two to make the analogy, and, because it's not obvious if you have a bunch of like weeks and months worth of time and tons of code sitting in a repository somewhere, it's not real obvious that you have this work in progress. You basically have assets that are basically not being used and not, and so you just have all this money tied up, so to speak, because it's a very different thing because it's not tangible, and they don't, it's harder for them to see that they've spent all this money on it, but it's not in the customer's hand. And so you really have to work through a lot of some of the things like we talked about. It's just about how quickly can you get value, how quickly can you learn. I think moving. It's funny because it's almost like a cliche that like software in Silicon Valley and all this is about like moving fast and breakneck speed and stuff like that. But underlying in that, there's actually manufacturing has taught us that there's real value in that quick adaptability. That the fact that like, even before you're about to deploy something, maybe you want to make changes, with the day before, they just, like, I don't know. I just think it's harder to conceptualize on its own, like just with software. But if you look into somewhere else where you have these very concrete things, it makes it easier.
Right. I remember a job I worked where I was asked to add in a piece of functionality to the project, and I discovered there was the 1,000-line method that I needed to somehow safely change in order to add this functionality. And what I did was I went to my manager and said, I cannot add this in a safe way when we have this 1,000-line method. There's just too much. I can't test it, one. And two, there's just too much risk to it because all of our core functionality is in this one method. I need to take some time to refactor this in order to be able to add more functionality to it and in order to be able to move faster in the future. I tried to do that in any big scale refactoring. I do like that. I try to do it in sort of an Agile fashion that I, tease out just a little bit of it and test it, merge that in, see if my tests miss something, get feedback on it, and continue doing it. So, I mean, it's a progressive way of doing the refactoring. However, my manager was thrilled once that was done with how fast we were able to add functions to it and how we were able to experiment with it and iterate on it without causing downtime for our customers. So the value was shown over the long term, but it is sometimes hard to say, I need to take time to fix this. And the way you do that is through tying it to a business outcome. Every business wants to be able to add new functionality without necessarily causing downtime, and showing that this will add to that ability. It goes a long way with many managers.
Yeah, and a lot of
but with many.
Well, and a lot of that is if your manager has been a developer before, they understand what it's like to encounter something like that, and so they can be empathetic, and that empathy allows them to extend that that time and the effort to make the things better.
Good. Well, I think we're coming kind of to the natural close of this conversation. I'm okay with ending a bit early. Shall we go to picks?
Let's do it.
All right. My first pick is the Great British Baking Show. I've actually been watching it for a while. My wife just finished law school and just passed the Washington State bar exam.
Nice.
And for years, our go-to de-stress show has been Great British Baking Show.
Yeah.
It's something that, and the Brits do this really well, it manages to be very engaging while also being soothing. Like, I don't feel hyped up whenever I watched it. And it was a good way just to give our minds a break and give the stress a little bit break and watch, very nice people making baked goods.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, and
then,
they got lovely accents too.
They do have lovely accents. It's part of what makes it so soothing. It's in a garden in the British countryside, and it's fun. My second pick, and I posted about this on Twitter today. So I have been using the Kinesis Advantage keyboard for a number of years now. It has been a career saver. I am someone who has some severe wrist issues, and whenever I use a regular keyboard for more than an hour or so, I start to get numbness and pain in my wrists and in my joints. I do not get that with the Kinesis Advantage. It took a while to learn how to use it. It is a learning curve because this is kind of a different layout than most keyboards, but it was 100% worth it. So if you have wrist issues or repeated stress injuries, I highly recommend checking out the Kinesis Advantage keyboard.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. So it's funny. So from the Great British Baking Show, I've only watched an episode or two, but I realized there was somebody on there I've actually met. There's a woman, Prue Lee.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So she was, when I worked for the Orient Express Hotel, she was on their board. And so she came to St. Martin one year for one of the events, and I helped her out one time. So she was a nice lady. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I guess she was kind of like a big cookbook author and maybe had some TV shows back in, 20, 30 years ago in the UK. So she's not somebody necessarily people know in the US that well, but it's a very UK centric show anyways. So all right, my pick. So the book recommendation I'll make this week is A Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates. I've been kind of a fan of following a lot of what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been doing, in general with their philanthropy, a lot around the stuff, interesting stuff around vaccinations. And this book is very much focused on, empowering women and what those changes make, like how those, changes affect the world. Like, Hans Rissling, was a good friend of theirs, and he's got a lot of great YouTube videos. One of the things they always talk about is like when the more you educate women and the more you allow them to do family planning, they've shown that like it has a huge correlation to like GDP growth of the country. It like literally lifts these countries out of really bad poverty and stuff like that. So I think this book it's really fascinating. So that would be a strong recommendation for me. And since I tend to always make really technical recommendations, I thought that was a good non-technical one to recommend.
Awesome. And
if you're looking for other book recommendations, I would definitely recommend checking out gatesnotes.com, which is Bill Gates's kind of like blog, so to speak. And he has specifically a book section where he makes a bunch of book recommendations. He reads a lot of books, and I think I've enjoyed some of the suggestions he made. I don't read that many of his, but I know that anybody who reads often is always looking for book recommendations and different varieties of stuff. He's definitely kind of has a very broad number of recommendations. So those are my picks.
You mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We had, I think it was their CIO speak at Chef Conf a couple of years ago. And what was cool was she spoke about how they use drones. Now, drones have a very negative connotation in our society, particularly in our society because they're associated with deadly military strikes. However, she highlighted that a way they use it is in natural disaster areas or even war areas, any kind of area where there's lots of roads that have been cut off or it's very hard to access. It's really cheap. It's way cheaper than using a helicopter to use a drone to transport medication from one location to the other, to transfer supplies from one location to the other. It was really cool to see how they use that in their charitable work.
Yeah, I don't know if it was related to them, but I know that there is a company in Africa now that's doing, or it might be an NGO or something like that, that's using drones to deliver blood. because that's a big problem, and they can deliver it like within an hour or something, or very, very quickly. So yeah, which is something that's very perishable, and
and if you need a transfusion, you need it right then.
Usually
they usually can't wait. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Scott, and thank you everyone, all of our listeners, for joining us. And we will see you, or at least talk to you, in our next episode. Have a great day.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.